The XX network has agreed to sponsor the show, and quite frankly I am honored. David Chom is a world-renowned cryptographer. These videos are to educate and inform you about the issues surrounding privacy in an entertaining manner, as well as the technological capabilities of the XX network. This is not financial advice. Surveillance breeds conformity. Glenn Greenwald.
The United States government, together with its friends, have been engaged in what Edward Snowden told us initially is called internally the full take. Have you heard that expression, the full take? That's spy talk for capturing every single bit that travels over every single wire in the world and saving it forever.
Privacy is a right. The NSA has been storing all of our metadata without due process, without suspicion of any wrongdoing. Your data is collected and stored forever.
You quickly get to about 1 million phone numbers. What do they do with those phone numbers? They put them in what they call the corporate store. The corporate store. So they have millions. In just 1 year, they have 288 million phone numbers in this corporate store. There's only about, 300 million of us? So they got a lot of our phone numbers, right, in the corporate store. And then what are the limits on their ability to look through that corporate store? None. Zero. That corporate store, there's no reasonable suspicion requirement. There's no requirement to go back to court. None. So I'm not so, I don't think it's such a program that we need not be concerned about. General Hayden also said there was no abuse. The abuse was that the government was doing this in our name without our approval. That was the abuse. And then lying to us so that we could not check them on what they were doing. Of course, political sustainability has to be a core of what a government agency does, General Hayden. In a democracy, that's what it's about. Technical feasibility, sure, but if it's not politically sustainable, you shouldn't be doing it as a representative of the American people.
The data was stored without consent. The government works for us and represents us, the people. These actions were not voted on by our elected representatives. Rogue agencies within the government took it into their own hands and violated our rights in the process.
We can do this in just a yes or no answer because I know Senator Feinstein wants to move on. Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
All right.
On March 12, 2013, Senator Ron Wyden asked Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, does the NSA collect any type of data on millions of Americans? His answer was no. It is a crime to lie before Congress. Later, the NSA issued an apology.
First of all, David's description of what you can do with metadata, and quoting a mutual friend, Stuart Baker, is absolutely correct. Okay, we kill people based on metadata, but that's not what we do with this metadata. Okay.
Thankfully.
Wow, I was working up a sweat there for a second.
It's really important to understand the program in its entirety, not the potentiality of the program, but how the program is actually conducted. So NSA gets phone records, gets them from the telephone company. They've been getting them since October of 2001 under one authority or another. Puts them in a lockbox, to use a phrase that was popularized a few years ago, and under very strict limitations can access the lockbox. What it cannot do are all those things that David suggested that allows someone to create your social network, your social interactions, your patterns of behavior. One could make the argument that that may or may not be useful. One can make the argument that may or may not be legal, but it's not done. NSA does not launch powerful algorithms against this domestic database in order to see inherent patterns not visible to the casual observer.
You notice how he makes the distinction of a domestic database. He says that they don't use powerful algorithms like advertisers use. They simply run queries in an ocean of data to build social graphs on suspects. This is all well and fine, and I'll take him at his word. However, the data is stored forever. What happens in the future? Dictators have risen to power during times of economic depression, populism, polarization, etc. All these issues that we see today. Our data is stored forever. Quantum computing and artificial intelligence will pair, and algorithms will become much more advanced than they are today. Manipulation and conditioning will be perfected with more powerful tools. That is why the XX network has made their layer 1 quantum resistant.
You know, I think that the fundamental interest in the blockchain space is probably triggered by, let's say, governmental usurpation of people's money. And there are a lot of places around the world where governments have devalued or basically confiscated money from consumers, and this, to a large extent, you could interpret as explaining why there's so much interest in digital money that is outside of the control of governments. But I think now the world is rapidly changing because of awareness of another kind of thing that governments and the like are taking from us, and that is all the information about us. They're taking our privacy away. You could say it's a theft of metadata. The public is, in many countries, outraged, and there is tremendous, let's say, hatred towards those social media companies and the like, the technological behemoths of this world, for having secretly stolen what it is that's essential and unique about us all.
When you sign up to Facebook or Twitter, what you are signing away into the terms of service is everything that you do on the platform as well as outside of the platform. In some cases is tracked and traced and recorded, where powerful algorithms analyze and distill the information. The distilled information is of value. It's your button, so to speak. This data can and is used to condition you. That is why when you react to a hot topic, your feed is flooded with similar posts that make you react. Social scientists like B.F. Skinner or Pavlov have written books about conditioning animals and humans by evoking a response or a trigger.
But moreover, and far more frightening, really, is the apparent ease with which this information can be used to not only manipulate our political orientation and our votes. So it's actually being used to take control of society. And that is a far worse threat than someone stealing your money, because basically what that means is they're stealing your freedom and your ability to be a human being. It's a very, very serious escalation. And so what's needed now urgently to address this issue is protection of what is referred to as metadata. Metadata was defined recently by Edward Snowden.
Metadata is the information before encryption. Some messengers and platforms encrypt your messages, meaning that no one can see what you wrote today. However, the metadata is the objective information: who, when, and where. The information can be used to build social graphs that are more revealing than you may realize. XX Messenger is a free messenger available on iOS and Android that shreds the metadata. There are zero gas fees, so you don't need a token to use the network.
Metadata absolutely tells you everything about somebody's life. If you have enough metadata, you don't really need content. It's sort of embarrassing how predictable we are as human beings. And that's the thing is, you know, with metadata, they can know when you called your girlfriend, when you called your ex-girlfriend, when you called your parents, when you called your children, when you called Alcoholics Anonymous, when you called a drug rehab center, when you called your drug dealer, when you called your political party. They know all of that. They can connect up. Who are your closest friends? Who are you most closely associated with? Who do you talk to all the time? Who do you talk to only sometimes? That's a tremendous amount of information that they can get. And we got it from General Counsel of the NSA himself. We don't even need content if we can get metadata. And let me just add, the program that we've all been talking about is a phone metadata program. But the law under which the NSA gathered this is not a law that limits to phone company and phone data. It's a law that allows the government to get any business records on anybody, and in their interpretation, literally anybody and everybody. And so they could get email records, who you've emailed, who's emailing you, what websites you're searching, what searches you put into Google. All of that goes to businesses, which then have those records, and under the NSA's theory of how American law should run, they can get any and all of that information, because it might happen that at some point, some of it might be useful to try to find a terrorist. To me, that's dragnet surveillance at its worst, and the distinction between content and metadata really is erased.
Is erased.
Metadata is very powerful and is able to tell you a lot, but they've also been storing your selfies. So now there's 78% of the data stored on NSA servers are selfies, and they plan to use this for facial recognition software. It's not just the NSA. Britain's surveillance agency, GCHQ, is another intelligence agency that's doing the same exact thing, where they're storing selfies. There's nothing stopping foreign intelligence agencies from collecting our data either. This is why politicians were talking about banning TikTok.
That's the way they want to do it. And what I said in 2018 was that, you know, the XX Messenger, the XX Network project was going to, and the XX Messenger was going to be a WeChat with privacy built in. And that's what we've done now. And that's the fundamental difference. So, you know, you hear a lot about CBDC. Is that something you talk about on your?
Certainly.
Yeah. Totally. Well, you know, there's only two kinds of CBDC. There's the kind with privacy and the kind without. And, you know, when the European Central Bank had a whole big comment thing on CBDC, you know, the majority of the comments were about privacy, that people wanted it. And so it's not easy to get in a CBDC. But, you know, if we do a CBDC like that is fully surveillance capable, it doesn't give the actual privacy keys to the users, allow them to create them, then, you know, we're not going to have the moral high ground over China. I mean, people are trying to precipitate some kind of new Cold War or something. I'm not a big fan of that, but it would seem that the basis of it is that this is not a free society and they're spying on people, and, you know, the state has too much power. And that really comes down to, can WeChat see who you talk to or not? And what kind of CBDC are we going to build? And what kind of messages are we going to have? The ones that actually let you protect that? Or is it going to be like, trust us, you know, oh, the government has the keys because we might need to check on you, you know, and all that. You know, that's basically the fork in the road. And I wrote about that and saw that very early on in no uncertain terms. And it remains the central issue because it's so fundamental. There's no way to protect your own information unless you have the keys to it. You know, you just can't trust other people with your keys because you don't know if they leak, what they leak and what they do. And so it's as simple as...
David Chaum, nicknamed the father of crypto for his discoveries in cryptography as well as his early work on distributed consensus prior to Satoshi's white paper on Bitcoin. Chaum is a world-renowned cryptographer and computer scientist, so much so that the Swiss National Bank asked for his input on central bank digital currencies. China is often criticized for its surveillance state. People like Christian Carlo, head of the Digital Dollar Project, understand that economic prosperity and economic freedom are tied. This is why he advocates for a layer of privacy within the U.S. digital currency. The eCash Act, sponsored by Representative Stephen Lynch, is proposed regulation to make the Fed coin replicate cash, where the CBDC is just like cash today.
And Apple and Google and Microsoft. When I first read the archive that Ed gave me, one of the things that struck me the most was what full-scale collaborators these companies were in the surveillance state that the NSA had created. They were not only complying, there's a helpful chart from Ed that has just magically popped up, all the companies that were part of the prison program and when they joined. And it includes essentially every leading company in Silicon Valley. And they not only cooperated to the extent the law required, but even way beyond that. There were documents about how Microsoft would meet with the NSA to help them build backdoors into Skype at the same time that they were promising the public that Skype was impenetrable. And the reason they were such full-scale collaborators is because they were doing it completely in the dark and no one knew they were doing it, and therefore there was no cost. Once we were able to shine a light on what these companies were doing and the full-scale partnership they had created with the government, all of that changed completely. And it didn't change because these companies decided suddenly that they care about your privacy. They still don't care about your privacy. But what changed is their fear that if they were perceived as being collaborators with the NSA, that they would lose the current generation or the next generation of internet users to social media companies in Korea or Brazil or Germany who would be able to say, don't give your data to Facebook and Apple because they'll give it to the NSA, give it to us instead.
This network is decentralized, so you don't have to worry about a centralized entity colluding with another entity to spy on you. It's open and permissionless, therefore, if there was any bad behavior, the network participants would be able to see it. As a very efficient and scalable consensus mechanism, therefore, most centralized services can be built on top of the XX network that offers privacy and protection. If you're a developer, there is a foundation that offers grants. Democracy requires accountability and consent of the governed, which is only possible if citizens know what is being done in their name. Glenn Greenwald. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon.